Today, I'm going to explain an action, adventure, and sci-fi film called Deep Blue Sea. Spoilers ahead. Watch out, and take care. A group enjoys a night of drinking on a yacht when something hits their boat. At first they ignore it, but the thumps grow stronger, damaging their boat's floorboards. A giant shark finally emerges from the center of the boat, throwing all the passengers overboard. The group desperately tries to get back to the boat as the shark pursues them, and suddenly a spear stabs into the shark. Carter Blake successfully captures the shark, saving the group. Due to the incident, Dr. Susan McAllister is called by Chimera Pharmaceutical directors. Her facility, the Aquatica, has been experimenting on sharks to research a cure for Alzheimer's disease. However, corporate executive Russell Franklin finds that the experiments have become too risky. To convince them to proceed, Susan promises to give them results that will skyrocket their stocks within 48 hours. Later, Russell joins Susan on the way back to the Aquatica. They soon land on the remote facility where Susan introduces Russell to marine biologist Janice Higgins. Russell spots a man swimming in the water with a shark nearby. He calls everyone's attention to it, and they watch as the man evades the shark and latches onto it. Carter then pries out the license plate stuck in the shark's teeth. Russell commends Carter on how he evaded the shark. Carter, however, isn't amused that a businessman is in their facility. Janice explains that everyone knows that he's here to investigate them. She then shows Russell the 3 test sharks, which are much bigger than the others. Soon, most of the crew board a ship to leave the facility, leaving the work to the skeleton crew over the weekend. Later, engineer Tom Scoggins criticizes Carter for using 2 shots to take down the escaped shark when he could have done it with just 1. Carter argues that Scoggs didn't lock the pen, hence why the shark got out. Scoggs insists that he locked the pen, but Carter isn't convinced. He then asks Scoggs how high the fences are, and Scoggs answers that they're about 8 feet tall. Janice continues giving Russell a tour, explaining how most of the facility is underwater. Sub-level 1 is the living quarters, 2 is the wet lab and workshops, and the 3rd is engineering and airlocked wet entry. Meanwhile, Susan works in her office with Dr. Jim Whitlock. He assures her that the Gen 2 subject will be ready soon, but they're not ready for the experiment. Susan stresses that they don't have a choice. In the airlock, Russell interviews Carter on what he does, but the man continues to be passive towards him. Frustrated over his prying, Carter insists that his job doesn't violate his parole. He doesn't intend to make a change like the doctors are getting in their way. This somehow satisfies Russell. In the kitchen, Sherman Preacher Dudley prepares a meal while his parrot insults him. To appease it, he feeds the bird with whipped cream. Later, the tower operator Brenda Kearns calls Susan to the surface. When Susan arrives, she's confused to find the area empty. Moments later, fireworks catch her attention, and the whole skeleton crew throws her a surprise birthday party. The crew enjoys a night of dancing and drinking. Carter and Susan talk privately where Carter reminds her of his invitation to drink with him. Susan, however, is too focused on her work to entertain his advances. Meanwhile, Jim and Janice explain how they used a hormonal enhancer to increase their female shark's forebrain to harvest more protein that could theoretically reactivate human brain cells. Later, Carter shares his theory that their test sharks attack in packs to target other potential predators. He believes that returning the shark that attacked the boat too soon was a bad idea. Hearing this, Susan stresses that if they don't achieve the results by tomorrow, they'll lose all their jobs. When she leaves, Scoggs joins Carter and assures him that they raised the fences. The next day, a storm brews near Aquatica. Scoggs and Carter prepare the facility for the incoming storm. Later, Carter is deployed into the tunnel to retrieve a shark. The 2 test sharks attack the tunnel but back away when he aims his gun. Russell is astonished that the sharks recognize the guns as a threat. Soon, their monitors malfunction as the sharks destroy all the cameras. Jim and Scoggs try to get Carter to retreat, but he doesn't appear to hear their calls. Carter then enters the pen and is attacked by a shark, but is able to shoot it with a spear, rendering it unconscious. The shark is then transferred into the platform that is lifted into the laboratory, along with Carter. The team then scans the shark while monitoring its health. After confirming that the shark is asleep, Susan enters the platform and installs a device to its head. The shark flinches, scaring her, but she proceeds anyway. Susan punctures the shark's head and extracts the protein complex. They then mix it into a cultured brain neuron from an Alzheimer's patient. To their delight, the protein complex successfully reactivates the neurons. Jim smokes in celebration and approaches the sleeping shark. It suddenly turns to him and bites off his arm. Carter quickly climbs out of the platform as the shark thrashes around. He collects a spear gun from the cabinets, but Susan ejects the shark back into the water before he can shoot. While Janice tends to Jim's injury, Brenda calls for a helicopter to evacuate him to a hospital. The team does their best to keep him stable while the helicopter heads their way. The helicopter struggles to land due to the storm, so Carter goes ahead to assist. They quickly take Jim on a stretcher and hook him up to be raised into the helicopter. As soon as the helicopter raises the stretcher, the team races back to the facility. However, the helicopter's lift jams, dropping Jim back into the water. Suddenly, something pulls the stretcher that's still connected to the helicopter. The helicopter gets dragged along, crashing into the facility and killing the pilots and Brenda in the ensuing explosion. The team in the lab struggle to find a working surveillance camera to figure out what happened. Instead, they find Jim's stretcher in a shark's mouth through the window. The shark throws the stretcher against the window, creating cracks in the glass. The team runs just before the window completely breaks, filling the room with water. Carter gets caught in the water but is able to swim back to the surface. With his help, the team finally opens the jammed door and forces it closed as the water spills inside. Due to the explosions, Preacher swipes a drink from the kitchen and tries to contact anyone but doesn't get a response. With the stairway flooded and the elevator shut down, the team is trapped in sub-level 2. The facility continues to shake, and Preacher takes it as a sign that he should stop drinking. Carter develops a plan to pass through the lab and head to sub-level 3 to take their submarine to get to the surface. Meanwhile, Preacher follows an echoing sound in the corridor in sub-level 1, only to be met by a wave of water. As the team passes by the lab, they hear something banging on the door. Soon, the door gets destroyed, so they hurry past it and to the maintenance door down the hallway. Finally, they open the maintenance door just as the area fills up with water, and once they're safe, Russell confronts Carter, asking if he thinks that a shark broke through the door. Carter figures the Gen 2 female shark did it, given her size. Russell deduces that the sharks are after them specifically, so he demands an explanation from Susan. Susan reluctantly explains that the sharks' brains were not large enough to extract the protein complex, so they genetically modified them to enlarge their brain mass. This led to the sharks getting smarter. She argues that their actions were needed to cure degenerative brain diseases, however the rest aren't convinced. Meanwhile, Preacher searches for a way out when he finds a shark heading towards him. Preacher desperately swims to escape and reach the kitchen. The shark passes by the kitchen, leaving him safe, for now. While making it to the submarine, Skoggs assures everyone that their fences will keep the sharks from escaping the facility. However, when they finally reach the airlock, they find the submarine is damaged. In the kitchen, Preacher grabs an axe to defend himself and climbs on top of a shelf to get out of the water. When he reaches the top, he gets startled by his parrot, which lands on a pot in the water. Preacher tries to get to the bird, but the shark emerges and devours it. Preacher grabs onto the shelf, but it topples. Preacher drops into the water and then swims into the oven. He closes the oven just before the sharks reach him. At sub-level 3, the team tries to figure out another way to escape. Janice spites at Susan for putting them into this situation. Out of options, Russell suggests that they take their chances and swim out of the facility. In the kitchen, the shark accidentally switches the oven on, filling it with gas. Preacher uses the axe to break the top part and climb out. He opens the top door and jumps out just as the shark gets stuck in the oven. He then throws a lighter onto the shark, causing the kitchen to explode. The team below feels the vibrations of the explosion as they prepare to dive into the water. Russell is optimistic about the plan, but Skoggs is still skeptical. Instead, Skoggs figures that they can climb via the maintenance ladder, but if the airlock shaft on the surface were destroyed in the explosion, the pressure would destabilize, filling the entire facility with water. Susan argues that they can't risk destroying the Aquatica, but Skoggs is unwilling to risk his life for her research anymore. Russell yells for them to stop arguing, recounting how he and his crew nearly gave up after surviving an avalanche. He reveals that his crew sacrificed 2 of them to escape the Alps. He now lectures this team to stop fighting, and instead work together to ensure that all of them survive. As he's instructing them what to do, a shark leaps from the pool behind him, and before he knew it, Samuel L. Jackson had another amazing death. The shark pulls Russell into the water and the rest can't do anything but watch his blood mix with the water. Terrified, Skoggs decides to wait for the rescue team to come. To help him focus, Carter asks what will happen if tons of water flood the facility. Skoggs calculates that the support struts will first break, then the walls. Carter then asks if he wants to stay and wait for that to happen, and Skoggs decides that he won't. The team finally agrees to take the risk and open the door to the maintenance ladder. As soon as they do, the pressure in the pool destabilizes, and water fills the facility. They rush inside but struggle to close the door. The women climb the ladder first while the men secure the door. Once it's sealed, the men catch up. However, the elevator on the surface is burning, causing fiery debris to fall on them. With no other choice, the team continues, hoping to reach sub-level 1 instead. When they hear the thumps on the bottom, Carter figures that another shark is trying to break through. He volunteers to open the door to sub-level 2 to introduce the water there and buy some time. The sharks open the door, causing the water to rise rapidly. Carter heads to sublevel 2 and pries the doors open, and as he does, the water pushes him off. Carter holds onto the ladder, narrowly avoiding the shark. With the facility being flooded, the support struts break, causing the facility to shake. The ladder unlatches from the wall and breaks. Janice falls into the water while the others hang on. Carter attempts to rescue her, but the shark gets to her first. Her death leaves Carter broken. The survivors are stuck on the ladder with the door to sublevel 1 barely at arm's reach. Suddenly, something bangs on sublevel 1's door, and to their surprise, it's Preacher. Preacher rescues the team, but the stairs to the surface are also flooded. Skoggs and Carter figure that they can drain the stairway to the surface if they can activate the emergency generators. Carter and Skoggs head back down to the flooded laboratory while Susan and Preacher stay on sublevel 1. While waiting for the two, Susan wants to get to her room to retrieve data records. Preacher criticizes her for still thinking of the research after so many of them have been killed, but Susan argues that their deaths would have been useless if they didn't retrieve the data. Carter enters the laboratory while Skoggs stays by the entrance to keep watch. Carter struggles through wires and broken equipment and ends up finding Jim's corpse, startling him. Carter comes up to the surface to scream, and Skoggs emerges having followed him. Alone in Janice's room, Preacher records a video as his last message in case he dies. Unsure of what to do or leave behind for the world, he starts revealing his omelet recipe. Finally, Carter and Skoggs reach the generators and activate them. However, the shark catches up and takes Skoggs. Carter swims away as the shark rips Skoggs in two, destroying the control panels in the process. Carter then swims to open the door, barely making it out before the shark reaches him. Meanwhile, Susan reaches her room and carefully makes her way to the locker. There, she grabs her data, and behind her, a looming shark fin approaches, but it's only the one from the shark model in her room. She pushes it away, but finds another shark fin looming. It suddenly races towards her, and Susan hurries out of the way. She climbs on a shelf for safety, but drops her research. She reaches for it, but the shark nearly bites her hand. Thinking quickly, Susan breaks the cables from her room's power box. Then, while standing on top of her scuba suit, she feeds the cables to the shark. The cables electrocute the shark, electrifying the water until the circuits break. The shark is killed, but her data is also destroyed. After reuniting with Carter and Preacher, the trio head to the decompression chamber. Since their plan to drain the stairway failed, they must swim to the surface. Carter prepares a fire extinguisher to lure the remaining sharks away. To equalize the pressure in the chamber, Carter opens the valves, letting the water in. As they wait for the chamber to fill up, the trio holds hands as Preacher leads a prayer. Finally, the chamber fills up. Carter opens the shaft and lets the others through. He then releases the fire extinguisher to lure the shark away as they swim to the surface. The shark spots the group and attacks the extinguisher, allowing the trio to reach the surface. As soon as they do, however, the shark catches Preacher. Susan and Carter swim away as the shark drags Preacher across the water. Preacher uses his crucifix to stab the shark in the eye, forcing it to release him. Carter then swims back to rescue him, and they reach solid ground. Susan patches up Preacher's wound before meeting back with Carter outside. Carter notices that the titanium fences have sunk along with the facility. He figures that the sharks have been chasing them to force them to sink the facility, thus sinking the fences to allow the sharks to get out. Susan decides to kill the last shark to prevent it from escaping. Carter loads the gunpowder into the spears and tells Susan to hook the wire into a car battery once he hits the shark, turning the spear into a bomb. The shark rams its head into the fence to escape. While Carter prepares to shoot it, he aims, but the shark no longer surfaces, as it has created a hole in the fence and is tearing it apart. Susan the genius decides to use herself as bait to lure the shark. She jumps into the water with a bleeding hand, catching the shark's attention. Once the shark races towards her, Susan attempts to get back to the surface, but the ladder breaks. Carter jumps in, but he's too late. Susan gets eaten by her own creation. The shark then chases after Carter, but he evades its attack and holds on to its fin. The shark thrashes around trying to get rid of him. Preacher regains consciousness and takes Carter's spear, executing his plan. He shoots the shark on the fin, but it also hits Carter's leg. Still, Carter yells for Preacher to blow up the spear. Preacher hesitates, knowing that it will kill Carter too. The shark tries to escape, driving itself into the fence. The shark gets out of the pen while Carter holds onto the fence just in time before Preacher triggers the explosion. Preacher smiles, seeing that Carter survived while the shark is dead. Soon after the two regroup, the crew who left for the weekend arrives. Exhausted, Carter and Preacher, they quit their jobs,